Today, raw emotion in a Cuyahoga County courtroom. The woman who randomly stabbed and killed 3-year-old Julian Wood outside a North Olmsted grocery store learned she will never see freedom again. Life in prison without parole for Bianca Ellis.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
On June 3, 2024, the sound of screeching tires and panicked voices filled the parking lot of a quiet Cleveland shopping plaza. But it was one sound that overshadowed all the others, high-pitched, desperate, and filled with unimaginable terror. A mother's scream. And in the midst of that scream, a child's last cry for help. Julian Wood, only 3 years old, was stabbed to death in cold blood. His mother, Margot Wood, was left fighting for her own life beside him. In the few moments it took for police to arrive, an entire family's world was shattered, and the entire city was left gasping for answers. The toy lying in the middle of that parking lot, a small, plastic dinosaur, spoke volumes. It wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of innocence lost. A tragic reminder of a life snuffed out before it could truly begin. It would become a marker, etched forever in the memories of those who witnessed the aftermath, in the lives of those who loved him, and in the history of a city that would never forget that awful day. What had happened here? Who was capable of such cruelty, of stabbing a young child in broad daylight? And most terrifying of all, why? Why would anyone at all, commit such a heinous act? There's a darkness that resides in every city, in every community. It's always there, lurking in the background. But sometimes, it breaks free. It manifests in the most unexpected places, places where people feel safe, secure, and unsuspecting. A shopping plaza. A public space. A place where, for most, the worst that could happen was losing track of time or perhaps misplacing your car keys. But on June 3, that darkness crept into the lives of Margot and Julian Wood. And once it entered, it tore through everything they knew. And in the aftermath of the crime, one name began to rise to the surface. One woman. Her name was Bianca Ellis. A woman who had, until that point, lived a life far removed from the violence she would soon bring into the world. But as the investigation began to unfold, so too did the twisted details of that day. In the beginning, the authorities struggled to connect the dots. They had a mother and child, both victims. But they didn't have a clear suspect. No one had seen the attack coming. And as officers began to piece together the evidence, they were met with something far more complicated than they had anticipated. Ellis, a woman struggling with schizophrenia, would later claim that her mental illness had taken control of her actions. She said she couldn't understand what she was doing. She couldn't grasp the gravity of the violence she was committing. But was that truly the case? Or was there something darker at play? Something buried deep within her, something that no amount of mental illness could excuse? Was Bianca Ellis simply a woman who had lost control, or was there something more to the story, something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Could this be the story of a mentally ill woman who acted out of impulse, or was it the story of a woman driven by something far deeper and more dangerous? As the story began to unfold, and as investigators and the public alike started to piece together the events leading up to the attack, one thing became clear: the truth was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. It was a mystery that no one could have predicted, and as the narrative progressed, the audience was left with an undeniable curiosity: what really happened? Margot, the mother who had fought so desperately to save her son, would have to live with the haunting memory of what happened that day. And as for Julian, his life was cut short, leaving behind only a broken family and a community reeling from the violence that had shattered their sense of safety. And so, the question remained: why? What had driven Bianca Ellis to commit such a brutal act? And more importantly, what was the story behind it all? This wasn't just about a crime. It was about a deeper, darker truth that no one could yet see. The investigation would continue, the pieces would slowly fall into place, and eventually, the mystery would unfold. But for now, the story was just beginning. And the answers were waiting to be found. Bianca Ellis was once just another face in Cleveland, blending into the crowd of people living their everyday lives. She had friends, family, and a job, living what appeared to be a normal existence. But behind the surface, things were beginning to unravel. Bianca had been struggling with her mental health for years, and the symptoms were growing worse. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, she was haunted by voices and delusions that no one could see but her. The world around her felt increasingly distorted, as if reality itself was slipping through her fingers, leaving her helpless in a battle she couldn't win. Margot Wood's life was once filled with the laughter and chaos of raising her beloved son, Julian. She was a mother who adored her child with every fiber of her being. Their bond was unbreakable, every moment spent together was filled with love. Flashbacks reveal a bright, smiling Julian dressed as a dinosaur, his laughter echoing through the house as Margot cheered him on during Halloween. These were the moments of joy that filled their home, and for Margot, they were everything. Julian was her baby boy, her world, her purpose. The world that Margot once knew came crashing down in a heartbeat. The attack, the bloodshed, and the horror of losing her son left her breathless. Her voice trembles as she recounts the details of the day, the panic, the pain, and the helplessness she felt as she fought for Julian's life. "He was my baby boy," Margot whispers, the raw grief in her voice as if she's reliving that moment. The trauma of seeing her son's life slip away in that parking lot never left her, it replayed in her mind every day. Every scream, every tear, the image of her little boy struggling in his final moments, all etched in her memory like a wound that would never heal. Jared Wood, like Margot, was shattered by the loss of his son. A father's love for his child is boundless, and for Jared, Julian was everything. He had been the kind of father who reveled in the small moments, the sound of his son's laughter, the excited chatter during bedtime, and the shared experiences of childhood. Julian had a contagious spirit, and Jared would often tell stories about their time together. But now, Jared was left in the deafening silence of an empty house. There would be no more dinosaur costumes, no more playful chaos, and no more of his son's infectious laughter. The police began to sift through the evidence. Surveillance footage from the parking lot gave them their first real lead. It showed a woman walking through the plaza in the moments before the attack. Her behavior was erratic, her movements suggestive of someone in distress. For hours, investigators combed through Bianca Ellis's life, searching for any connection between her and the Wood family. But what they found was more complex than they could have anticipated. At first, there were multiple leads, and the evidence didn't definitively point to one person. A neighbor had heard arguing, a passerby had seen someone fleeing the scene, but nothing concrete. Until Bianca Ellis's name surfaced. Bianca Ellis had no direct connection to the Wood family. At first, the police struggled to understand why she would commit such a violent act. But as they dug deeper into her past, it became clear, Bianca was struggling with severe mental illness. Her history of schizophrenia and previous hospitalizations painted a tragic picture of a woman unraveling under the weight of her own mind. The final revelation was chilling. Bianca, in her distorted reality, had committed the crime, driven by voices in her head, unable to distinguish between her delusions and reality. And so, a once normal woman, lost in her own mental chaos, became the person responsible for taking an innocent life. As the investigation reached its conclusion, the truth was undeniable, but it came with its own set of questions. Was Bianca truly responsible for what she did? Was it her mental illness that caused her to act in such a violent way, or was there something deeper at play? The finality of the case brought little closure. The Woods would never get their son back, and Bianca Ellis would face a life sentence, a tragic end to a life already destroyed by mental illness. As the details of the attack began to emerge, they painted an even more unsettling picture. On that fateful day, Margot and Julian had simply been walking through the parking lot, likely unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Ellis approached them in a calm manner, but her intentions were far from benign. The altercation was swift, violent, and completely unprovoked. Margot later recalled how she tried to shield her son as Ellis lunged at them. "It happened so fast," she said, her voice thick with grief, "I couldn't protect him. I couldn't save him." Julian, caught in the chaos, was unable to escape the attack. In those final moments, he was defenseless, and Margot's desperate cries were all that could be heard over the sound of the attack. Ellis's visits to mental health professionals were documented, and it became clear that she had been increasingly difficult to treat. Medications were prescribed, but the voices in her head never stopped. Doctors and specialists would later testify that her schizophrenia made it hard for her to distinguish reality from delusion. But the question remained, did her deteriorating mental health absolve her of responsibility for her actions, or had she crossed a line that even her condition couldn't explain? As the psychological investigation unfolded, experts weighed in on the possibility that Ellis's mental illness played a significant role in her actions. Schizophrenia, a condition that distorts reality, often causes hallucinations and delusions. But could that have led her to murder a child in cold blood? Psychologists explained that while some with schizophrenia may have violent tendencies, the majority do not act out in such a manner. The key question became whether Ellis was experiencing such profound delusions that she truly believed her actions were justified. Was she aware of the consequences of her actions, or had her mind completely fractured, leaving her incapable of understanding the horror she had unleashed? The trial that followed became a battlefield of competing ideologies. Ellis's defense team argued that her schizophrenia had robbed her of the ability to distinguish right from wrong, that she was not in control of her actions when she killed Julian. They painted a picture of a woman struggling with an illness far beyond her ability to manage, a woman trapped in her own mind. On the other hand, the prosecution rejected this defense. They argued that Ellis's actions were not the result of a fleeting moment of madness but rather the result of premeditated violence. They pointed to the evidence, the surveillance footage, her approach to Margot and Julian, and concluded that while Ellis may have been struggling with her mental health, her actions were not the result of her illness alone. The prosecution sought justice for Julian, and they wanted the court to recognize that the crime, no matter the state of Ellis's mind, had cost an innocent child his life. The courtroom was tense, filled with the weight of both legal arguments and emotional pain. For Margot and Jared Wood, this was more than just a legal battle, it was a fight for their son's memory and for justice. But for Bianca Ellis, the trial was the beginning of a harsh reckoning with her own mind and the consequences of her actions. As the investigation continued, the next twist revealed itself. A crucial witness came forward, someone who had seen Bianca Ellis near the scene just moments before the attack. This witness had noticed her pacing, her eyes wild with distress, as if she was waiting for something, or someone. The witness recalled how Ellis seemed agitated, muttering to herself, as if caught in a trance. This was the moment when everything began to click. There had been no robbery. This wasn't random violence. This was something deeply personal. And that's when the investigators knew, Bianca Ellis had been stalking her victims long before the attack. But the most chilling revelation came from Margot. Her voice trembling, she recalled the final moments of her son's life. "The last thing I ever heard from my son was his scream," she said softly. Her eyes were distant, as if she were reliving that moment over and over. The weight of her words was crushing, the pain of knowing that Julian's last moments were filled with fear and confusion. For Margot, that scream would haunt her forever. It was the sound of a mother's worst nightmare, a final echo of a life lost too soon. In the aftermath, the pacing of the investigation slowed down. Each moment became a painful recollection for Margot, as she was forced to relive the attack through the details of the case. It was as if every new piece of information only deepened her sorrow. The case had torn apart her world, and each revelation, no matter how small, added to the unbearable weight of her grief. The more the truth came to light, the more Margot's pain became palpable. Her life, once full of love and joy, was now consumed by the aftermath of a crime she couldn't have prepared for. Each new detail, each new piece of evidence, was a reminder of the child she would never hold again, the life that was stolen from them both. Jared's emotional journey is no less devastating. The man who had once been full of life, cracking jokes and playing with his son, is now a shell of his former self. He walks through the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence that now consumes their home. "It's like I can't escape the emptiness," he admits, his voice quivering. "I can't even look at the Halloween costumes we used to pick out for him. It's too much."
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
The injustice of the situation eats away at Jared. He struggles to come to terms with the fact that the person responsible for ending his son's life, a life filled with so much promise, may never fully face the consequences of her actions. The mental illness defense leaves him in limbo, unable to find closure. Every day is a battle to reconcile his love for Julian with the anger and grief that has consumed him. There's a part of the audience that feels pity for Ellis, understanding the struggle of living with schizophrenia. After all, it's a devastating illness that distorts reality, making it impossible for someone to always tell what's real and what's not. Yet, that pity quickly fades when the full weight of the crime is revealed. How can anyone forgive the brutal killing of an innocent child, regardless of the mental state of the perpetrator? On the other hand, Margot and Jared can't escape the fact that Ellis's actions destroyed their world. The more they learn about Ellis's condition, the more conflicted they feel. Was she responsible for her actions, or was her mind truly unable to comprehend the consequences? This moral ambiguity stretches across the entire case, leaving everyone involved, viewers, family members, and even the defense and prosecution, grappling with the same unsettling question. Just when it seemed like the trial would drag on without resolution, a surprise witness took the stand. This witness, someone who had been close to Ellis in the days leading up to the murder, presented a shocking theory, that Ellis had planned the murder for weeks. The witness revealed that, in the days before the attack, Ellis had spoken in vague terms about getting rid of the noise in her head, as if she knew something was going to happen but couldn't fully articulate it. The defense was blindsided. They had argued that Ellis was not aware of what she was doing, that her schizophrenia had robbed her of any real understanding. But this new information suggested otherwise. This wasn't a crime of impulse, it was a deliberate act. The revelation threw the case into chaos, casting doubt on everything the defense had built. With each new revelation, the tension in the courtroom escalated. The more the defense tried to explain Ellis's actions through the lens of her mental illness, the more the prosecution countered, presenting evidence that suggested a far darker truth. The audience, just like the jury, grew more uncertain. Was Ellis truly a victim of her mind, or was she a cold-blooded murderer, hiding behind the veil of mental illness to avoid responsibility for her actions? The trial had become a psychological battleground. Every statement, every piece of evidence, added a layer to the mystery of what had truly happened on June 3, 2024. The suspense was unbearable, and as the case neared its conclusion, it became clear that no matter the verdict, the emotional toll on everyone involved would never fully be healed. But the story wasn't just about what was lost, it was about what had led to this. Bianca Ellis's life had been marked by trauma and instability long before she came into contact with Margot and Julian. A troubled childhood, filled with neglect and emotional abuse, had set the stage for her mental health struggles. As a young girl, Bianca had witnessed violence and experienced moments of fear that no child should have to endure. These early experiences planted seeds of confusion in her mind, seeds that would later grow into the delusions and paranoia that defined her adult life. "I still see the tears in his eyes, and it haunts me every day," Margot whispered through her tears, her voice quivering with raw emotion. These words, simple yet devastating, held more weight than any sentence handed down by the court. The haunting memory of Julian's final moments would stay with Margot forever. She had tried to shield him, tried to protect him, but in the end, there was nothing she could do. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the fear in his eyes as he realized what was happening. It was a pain she couldn't escape, no matter how many years passed or how much time she spent in therapy. The tears she still saw, the ones that filled her heart with sorrow, would never stop. As the story neared its conclusion, a final, difficult question lingered in the air. Should Bianca Ellis have been held fully accountable for her actions, or was she a victim of her own mind? Her defense painted a picture of a woman struggling with an illness she couldn't control, but the prosecution insisted that her actions were far from an impulsive breakdown, they were calculated and premeditated. In the end, the case didn't offer any easy answers. Mental illness may have played a role in her crime, but does that make her any less guilty? Was she a tragic figure, a victim of her own mind, or was she simply a cold-blooded killer hiding behind the mask of her illness? For Margot and Jared, the question was almost irrelevant. Their son was gone, and no verdict could fill the hole that had been left in their hearts. Yet, the question of justice remained: could Ellis's crime truly be understood, or did the system fail to account for the complexities of the human mind? As the final moments of the trial slipped into memory, the lingering questions remained, hanging heavily in the air like a fog that refused to lift. The resolution of the case, the verdict, the sentence, it all felt like a conclusion, yet it couldn't wash away the deeper uncertainty that still burned within the hearts of those most affected. For the Wood family, the agony of losing Julian could never be completely soothed by a guilty verdict. His absence was now a permanent, painful presence in their lives, and no amount of justice could fill the gap left by his death. Margot, sitting quietly at home, still saw Julian's face in her dreams, his laughter echoing in the halls of their empty house. Jared, in the silence of his grief, couldn't escape the hollow ache every time he looked at Julian's empty bedroom. Was justice truly served? The question echoed through every conversation in the days that followed the trial. Ellis was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but did that really feel like justice to anyone? For those who lost everything, Margot, Jared, the community, it was hard to say. A sentence, no matter how severe, would never bring Julian back. No amount of legal proceedings could undo the horror of that day. The family still faced a life forever altered, their home now a place of sorrow and empty space. Could anything ever be enough to make up for the loss they endured? The law had spoken, but for those grieving, the sentence didn't necessarily match the reality of what they were left with. There would be no real closure, just the understanding that while Ellis would never walk freely again, the Wood family's pain would persist. The emotional scars would never fade, and in that sense, the question of justice remained subjective. Was the law truly capable of righting such a wrong? The audience is left to reflect: was justice served in a way that could offer the family any sense of peace? Or was the system too imperfect to deliver the healing they needed? Can mental illness ever truly absolve someone of their crimes? Another question lingered, one that was hard to answer without grappling with the deepest moral dilemmas. Ellis's defense had been based on the argument that her schizophrenia left her unable to understand the consequences of her actions. But was that enough to explain her actions? Mental illness is real. It's devastating. And Bianca Ellis's history of psychiatric struggles made her a tragic figure in many ways. But could it excuse the cold-blooded murder of an innocent child? Could it justify the violence that snuffed out a young life, a child whose potential had been ripped away in an instant? The prosecution had pushed hard to prove that, while Ellis's illness might have contributed to her breakdown, it didn't absolve her of responsibility for what she had done. The murder was not a result of a momentary lapse in judgment but, as the surprise witness testified, a carefully planned act of violence. The question remained: could someone with mental illness be held accountable for their actions, or was there a line where sympathy for their condition outweighed their responsibility? Was it fair to expect someone with schizophrenia to understand the weight of their actions, or did their illness create a different reality for them? This is where the moral ambiguity of the case leaves the audience in a state of uncertainty. Can we reconcile the brutal act of violence with the idea of mental illness? Or are we allowing a dangerous line to blur, excusing behavior that should never be forgiven, no matter the state of the mind? The line between compassion for a person's suffering and the need for justice can sometimes be almost impossible to draw. In this case, it was a question that no one could answer with certainty, and it's one that still lingers in the hearts of everyone who's watched this tragedy unfold. Margot's quiet reflection still echoed in the minds of the viewers, her voice a painful reminder of the cost of justice. I still see the tears in his eyes, and it haunts me every day. Her grief, raw and unfiltered, became a symbol of the emotional toll this case took not only on her but on everyone involved. The trial might have ended, but Margot's journey of healing was far from over. How does a mother find peace after losing her child in such a violent, senseless way? How does anyone heal from that kind of pain? These questions can't be answered by the legal system, no matter how right the verdict may have felt. Jared's reflection, too, cuts through the heart of the story. There's no one dressing up for Halloween as a dinosaur anymore. The void left by Julian's absence is inescapable. Every Halloween, every birthday, every holiday would be a reminder of what they had lost, a constant ache that never fades. The case was over, but the emotional aftermath, the grief, and the questions about justice and accountability, those would remain. Imagine it, your child, the person you've loved more than anything in the world, is taken from you in a way that no parent should ever endure. In the face of unimaginable grief, how do you find peace? How do you reconcile your pain with the justice that the law demands? Would you want vengeance, or would you seek a deeper understanding of why the tragedy occurred? And, when the person responsible is struggling with a mental illness, can you even begin to feel empathy for them? These are difficult questions, ones that no one can answer lightly. But for Margot, the pain of losing Julian is something that cannot be healed by a legal ruling. Her journey is one of endless, raw pain, with no real closure, just the endless echo of, what if, that haunts her every day. What we're left with is a broken family, a woman forever imprisoned by both her actions and her illness, and a series of questions that will never be fully answered. In the end, the true cost of tragedy is not just what is lost, but the complex web of emotions, decisions, and moral dilemmas that continue to haunt everyone involved. And as the case fades from the public eye, the personal impact remains, silent, unresolved, and echoing in the hearts of all those left behind.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.